You ever wake up one day and realize the life you thought you were living wasn't yours at all? That's how it hit me. Not like a crash. Not like thunder. It was quieter than that, more like the slow creak of a floorboard in the dark. You hear it, you pause, and deep down you know, something's in the house that shouldn't be. I guess that's how I'd describe what it felt like, finding out my wife drained our joint savings to fund her spiritual advisor's wellness retreat in Sedona. A man I'd only ever seen through pixelated Zoom calls, wearing tunics and bracelets, talking about aligning chakras and detoxing the ego. The kind of guy who called himself Shaylen and refused to use last names, because names are colonial constructs. I always thought he was just some expensive hobby. Turns out, he was the reason I'd wake up in a cold house with an empty bank account and a marriage that was about to be set on fire. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it started, before the lawsuit, before the lawyers, before the healing journey turned into a full-blown war. My wife's name is Emily. And if you knew her 10 years ago, you'd never guess she'd end up burning sage in our bedroom while quoting crystals. She used to be sharp. Practical. A middle school math teacher who color-coded everything and used coupons like it was a sport. She was grounded, the kind of person you trusted to handle the bills because she actually read the fine print. But then life got complicated. About 2 years ago, she had a miscarriage. It was our second try. And something in her just changed after that. She got quiet. Stopped watching her favorite shows. Started scrolling Instagram a lot, following yoga pages and crystal shops and women named things like Munra and Essence. At first, I thought she was just trying to cope, find meaning in something awful. I didn't fault her for that. Grief does weird things to people. I figured it'd pass. We'd talk. We'd get through it. But instead of therapy, she found Shaylen. At first, he was just a guy she watched on live streams. Then it was Zoom sessions, twice a week. Then she started going to weekend retreats, silent meditations, group breathwork, inner child rescues. It didn't bother me much in the beginning. I mean, if it helped her get out of bed and feel something again, who was I to criticize? But little by little, the Emily I knew started slipping away. She began referring to our home as a container. Our bedroom became a restorative sanctuary. She started putting Himalayan salt lamps in every room and insisted we stop using the microwave because it vibrated against the Earth's rhythm. I drew the line when she told me to stop wearing deodorant because it blocked my emotional exhale. And all the while, Shaylen became a god. She'd quote him at dinner. Talk about how his energy was so pure it made her skin tingle. She even once said, and I wish I was making this up, that he was the first man who truly saw her soul. I laughed. That was my mistake. Because while I was rolling my eyes, Emily was making moves. I didn't notice the money at first. I paid the mortgage, the car, the insurance, our agreement since I made more. She handled the day-to-day stuff. The groceries. The savings. And I trusted her. We had a joint account we both dipped into occasionally, but she mostly managed it. At least, I thought she did. Then one Monday morning, I went to transfer money to cover a home repair and saw the balance. $312.17. We had over 30 grand in that account the last time I checked. It was our safety net, what we'd been slowly building in case of an emergency. For future kids. For life. And now, there was barely enough to cover a full tank of gas. I thought it was a mistake. I double-checked. Logged in again. Called the bank. It wasn't a mistake. Over 6 separate withdrawals, each for thousands of dollars, she'd slowly siphoned off nearly every cent. The descriptions were vague. Sacred renewal, inner path experience, somatic alignment. I didn't recognize any of it. Until I looked closer at the final one. Shaylen Sedona Rebirth Intensive, Full Access Package. $12,000. Paid 2 days before. My hands were shaking. Not because of the money. But because I realized, this wasn't a phase. This was a belief system. And she had bought in with everything she had. When I confronted her that night, she didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She didn't even look surprised. She just said, "I knew you wouldn't understand. You never supported my healing." I told her I wanted a divorce. She didn't flinch. But a week later, I got served. She was suing me for emotional damages. Claimed I'd undermined her healing process, that I was hostile to her spiritual autonomy, and, my personal favorite, that I willfully refused to ascend emotionally alongside her. I'd been blindsided once already. I didn't plan to let it happen again. You ever walk into a room where it feels like everyone but you got the script? That was me the first time we stepped into mediation. I had a folder full of bank statements. Emily had a lavender scarf, 3 rose quartz stones, and a manila envelope labeled "Energetic Violations, March through June." I remember sitting there, blinking under those flickering ceiling lights, thinking, this can't be real. This has to be a joke. But it wasn't. The mediator, poor guy, was named Greg. Nice enough. Wore a mismatched tie and had the polite exhaustion of someone who's heard every ridiculous excuse for why a marriage fell apart. But even he looked caught off guard when Emily slid a handwritten list across the table and called it "Exhibits of Energetic Suppression." At the top of that list, he refused to attend my soul regression ceremony. He mocked my third eye opening process. He rolled his eyes when I saged the dishwasher. He said Shaylen was a scam artist who wore bracelets from Etsy. Guilty on all counts, I'll admit. Emily sat across from me in flowing linen, arms crossed, expression serene in that performative peace way I'd come to recognize, the kind that's less about inner calm and more about theatrical restraint. She didn't look angry. She looked evolved. At least that's what she wanted the room to think. Greg asked if we were open to mediation or if this was heading straight to court. I said I was here to settle fairly. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted closure. Emily smiled, that condescending kind of smile that usually precedes a sermon, and said she was open to a path of healing that honored her emotional injuries. I told Greg she drained our savings without my consent. Emily said she was honoring her deep ancestral wisdom and feminine intuition. I said she funded a stranger's spa retreat with the money we saved to one day start a family. She said family was a construct rooted in colonial capitalism and male lineage control. At that point, Greg actually rubbed his temples. After a long breath, he tried to steer us toward finances. I pulled out the bank statements. Highlighted the 6 transfers. Walked him through the balance history. Emily, for her part, didn't deny a single charge. She just kept saying I wasn't spiritually aligned enough to understand the value of what she purchased. And then came the kicker. She said Shaylen's retreat didn't just cost money, it cleansed money. That the funds, once used, were transformed into energetic abundance that would return to us in other forms. I asked her, flat out, where exactly this abundance had returned. She said, without blinking, your resentment is blocking it. And that's when I realized, this wasn't about money. This wasn't even about the marriage anymore. This was about belief. Emily believed she had transcended the reality we'd built together. And in her new world, she was the enlightened one, and I was the problem. The mediation stalled. No progress. I was labeled hostile to the healing path and financially rigid. She said she deserved compensation for my spiritual sabotage. I said I'd be happy to walk away with nothing if she'd stop pretending she was a victim in a story she wrote herself. She gasped like I'd slapped her. Greg asked us both to step out and cool down. I stood in that hallway, arms crossed, watching people pass by, some in suits, some in sweats, all just trying to navigate the messes we make. And it hit me, I wasn't mad about the money anymore. I wasn't even mad at her. I was grieving something far stranger, the version of her I used to know. The woman who used to cry during Pixar movies and leave sticky notes on the fridge that said, "Bought too much coffee again. Forgive me." She was gone. And the woman behind that mediation table wasn't looking for compromise. She was looking for a moral victory. Proof that her ascension had consequences for those who didn't believe. A week later, I got her formal response through her lawyer. It was 10 pages long and included phrases like sacred contract breach, vibrational interference, and emotional colonization. It also came with a settlement request, half of my retirement savings. Because apparently, healing isn't free, and neither is divine realignment. There's a certain kind of silence you feel deep in your bones, the kind that settles in when logic has left the room, but you still have to sit there and pretend it makes sense. That was me, staring at a legal document where my soon-to-be ex-wife was accusing me of energetic neglect and seeking financial balancing in accordance with karmic law. I had to read that phrase 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Karmic law. As if we were in some divine court presided over by Buddha and a CPA. I handed the paperwork to my attorney, Jen. Mid-40s, straight shooter, no-nonsense kind of woman who could dismantle a man in a 3-piece suit with just her reading glasses and a raised eyebrow. She skimmed the file, sighed once, the kind of sigh that says, "I've seen worse, but not by much," and said, "Well, this is definitely new." Emily's claim wasn't just emotional damages anymore. She'd added a request for compensation based on unreciprocated energetic labor, claiming she spent years creating harmony, vibrationally nurturing the relationship, and that my refusal to spiritually evolve had resulted in irreparable imbalance in her feminine field. I swear I'm not making this up. Jen looked up and asked me a question I wasn't ready for. "Do you want to fight this in court, or just settle and walk?" Now listen, I'm not a man who runs from conflict. But I'm also not an idiot. I'd seen enough courtroom drama to know that when the facts are clear but the emotion is louder, logic doesn't always win. I didn't want to burn everything down just to prove a point. I wanted out. Clean. Quiet. But fair. So I asked Jen to draw up a counterproposal. We'd split what was left, which, to be honest, wasn't much after the Sacred Alignment series, and the Rebirth Intensive, in Sedona, and we'd each walk away with our own future. Emily declined. Said I was trying to reduce a sacred union to numbers. Said I was avoiding accountability for spiritual betrayal. Said I owed her compensation for every moment I rolled my eyes when she spoke of lunar transitions. And I'll admit, I did laugh at that last one. Maybe I shouldn't have. But something about being sued for eye-rolling broke the last bit of my composure. Emily's lawyer was a guy named Trent. Looked like he came straight out of a wellness retreat catalog, tight ponytail, linen suit, those circular wireframe glasses people wear when they want to look wise and non-threatening. He called me brother during our first call. I called him counselor. We didn't talk again after that. The weeks dragged. I kept working. Kept showing up. Tried not to think too hard about the absurdity of it all. But every time I opened my inbox and saw another email from Jen, my stomach sank. One day it was Emily requesting a symbolic restitution ceremony. Another day it was an emotional energy audit she expected me to attend, complete with chakra evaluation. Jen, to her credit, handled it all with a sort of grim professionalism. At one point, she leaned over her desk, tapped the paper, and said, "This woman wants to invoice your soul." But what really got me, was what I found one afternoon while clearing out the guest bedroom. Buried in a drawer full of Palo Santo sticks, vision boards, and old affirmations, I found a notebook. Not a spiritual journal. Just a plain, spiral-bound notebook. Inside, Emily had written letters. To me. Some dated years back. Some recent. Some angry. Some tender. One said, I wish you could see how much this is saving me. Another said, I know you think it's weird, but it's the only thing that makes me feel real. And then one, halfway through the notebook, stopped me cold. It said, if he ever leaves, I hope I've healed enough to let him. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't trying to punish me. Not really. She was trying to justify the wreckage. To herself. To the people watching. Maybe even to Shaylen. She needed me to be the villain in her spiritual movie, the emotionally constipated cynic who couldn't support her awakening. Because if I wasn't the villain, then maybe she'd left a good man for nothing. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed we'd once talked about babies in, and I finally felt something besides anger. I felt sorry. Not for myself. For her. For the version of her that still believed this whole healing spiral would lead somewhere bright. I think, once upon a time, she just wanted to feel whole again. I just wasn't the tool she needed to get there. But I also knew this, I couldn't keep losing pieces of myself to someone else's search for themselves. So I told Jen, go to court. Let them call in the crystals. Let them quote Shaylen. Let them drag out the incense and the affirmations. I was done negotiating with a dream someone else refused to wake up from. Now I'm not saying I expected a goat sacrifice in the middle of the courtroom, but by the time I walked into that hearing, nothing would have surprised me. The place reeked of lavender oil. Literally. Emily had arrived early and cleansed the room with a diffuser she brought in herself. She'd also brought Shaylen. In person. The man himself, with his ankle-length scarf, bare feet in loafers, and the energy of someone who thinks gravity is optional. He wasn't testifying, not officially. But he sat there like he was part of the legal team, scribbling in a leather-bound journal with a feather pen. No joke. A feather pen. On my side, it was just me, Jen, and a quiet stack of documents, bank records, email exchanges, and that notebook I found. I didn't want to use it. I really didn't. But Jen insisted. Said it showed a pattern, emotional instability, shifting narratives, the kind of personal writings that courts actually take seriously when someone's trying to make you out to be the second coming of Darth Vader. The judge was a no-frills kind of guy, graying, mid-60s, looked like he'd rather be fishing. But the moment Emily's attorney started referring to me as a spiritually stunted masculine archetype resistant to feminine awakening, his eyebrows disappeared into his forehead. The core of Emily's case rested on this idea that by not supporting her journey, by expressing skepticism, by not attending retreats, by once refusing to join her in a midnight drumming circle for root chakra liberation, I had inflicted emotional harm. That I had sabotaged her spiritual expansion, leading her to feel unsafe, unfulfilled, and celestially divorced. That was the phrase. Celestially divorced. Jen leaned over and whispered, "You owe me drinks after this." We countered, of course. Pointed out that the issue wasn't belief, it was breach. She'd taken thousands from a shared account without my consent. That wasn't a soul wound. That was theft with a sandal tan. Emily took the stand next. She spoke softly. Almost like she was leading a guided meditation instead of legal testimony. Said she never meant to hurt me. Said the retreat was an emergency intervention of the spirit. That Shaylen had unlocked traumas from past lives, some of which, she claimed, were mine. At one point, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "You were a Roman tax collector in one of my regressions. You silenced my soul then too." The courtroom was dead silent. Not out of respect, out of sheer confusion. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't want to. But because, what was there to say? Jen asked her one question, "Did your husband give you permission to use the savings account for Shaylen's retreats?" Emily paused. Then said, "He never forbade it." That was her answer. Because I didn't explicitly tell her not to use our money on a self-proclaimed soul guide, she took it as implied consent. That right there, that logic, was what finally turned the tide. The judge had heard enough. He leaned forward, took off his glasses, and said, "Miss Lister, I'm not here to judge your beliefs. I'm here to judge your actions. And draining a shared financial account to fund spiritual retreats, without your partner's knowledge or consent, is not emotional injury. It's financial misconduct." He ruled in my favor. Emily would get no part of my retirement savings. She would owe half of the drained funds back, and we'd split everything else clean down the middle. I walked out of that courtroom free, legally, financially, emotionally. But not unchanged. I remember passing Shaylen in the hallway afterward. He didn't look angry. He looked amused. He muttered something about me missing the karmic lesson. I looked him square in the eye and said, "If I have to learn my lesson through you, I'll gladly stay uneducated." He smiled. A slow, smug, "you'll see" kind of smile. Emily didn't speak to me. Just walked past, head high, as if she was ascending above the whole ordeal. But something in her shoulders looked heavier than I remembered. I drove home in silence that day. No music. No calls. Just the steady rhythm of tires and closure. But later that night, when I got home, there was a package on my porch. No name. No note. Just a small wooden box. Inside, a polished stone and a single slip of paper that read, "True growth only comes when you love someone into awakening." No return address. No postmark. But I didn't need one. You'd think winning in court would feel like some kind of triumph. Like I'd walk out of there with a weight lifted, the past in the rear view, and the rest of my life stretching out in front of me like a smooth highway. But it didn't feel like that. Not at all. It felt like crawling out of a burning house barefoot. Yeah, I made it out, but not without some splinters. After the ruling, I moved into a small rental about 15 minutes from the old place. Nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, paint that probably hadn't been updated since the Bush administration, but it was mine. Quiet. Honest. No incense. No affirmations taped to the fridge. No whispering from the other room about how Saturn was in judgment. I didn't tell many people what happened. Most of them didn't understand anyway. The ones who'd met Emily before the transformation, the teacher, the neighbor who brought casseroles, the woman who used to organize PDA fundraisers like military campaigns, they wouldn't have believed the version I saw at the end. And maybe that's the strangest part of all this. It wasn't just a breakup. It was like I watched someone slowly dissolve into another person, and there was nothing I could do but stand there and let it happen. Still, you don't get through something like that without some kind of reckoning. I spent a lot of nights staring at the ceiling in that little house, asking myself the hard questions. Did I miss the signs? Did I stop listening when she needed me most? Did my sarcasm, my side-eyed comments about moon cycles and soul contracts, do more harm than I realized? I mean, yeah, part of me wanted to scream she was crazy and call it a day. But the deeper part of me, the one that still remembered holding her hand during ultrasounds, still remembered the way she'd say, "Hey, babe," like it meant home, that part knew the truth was more complicated. Grief changes people. That miscarriage tore a hole in both of us, and instead of grieving together, we grieved apart. I buried mine in work. She went looking for something bigger, something softer, something that promised the pain could be transformed into light. The tragedy is, maybe if we just met each other in the middle, tears on the kitchen floor, honesty at 2 a.m., none of this would have happened. But we didn't. And now here I was. 38. Alone. Listening to the wind rattle the windows of a rental that didn't yet feel like home, eating takeout from the same Chinese place every Friday, and wondering if I'd ever feel like myself again. And then came Maggie. She wasn't some rebound. Not some bar pickup or a dating app escape hatch. Maggie was the barista at the place near my office, the one I started frequenting because they played Springsteen and didn't try to sell me herbal memory shots. She wore flannel. Had short hair and this no-nonsense way of looking at you that made you feel like she'd already heard all your excuses, and would still give you extra whipped cream anyway. The first time we really talked, I made some offhand joke about Mercury being in retrograde because my coffee lid kept popping off. She smirked and said, "That's not Mercury. That's just your weak wrist." I laughed harder than I had in months. Over time, those morning coffees turned into longer chats. Then walks. Then real conversations. About music. About grief. About how hard it is to forgive people who've hurt you when they still think they're saving you. She never asked for the full story. But one night, I told her. All of it. From Shaylen to the court case to the polished stone on my porch. She didn't roll her eyes. Didn't try to fix it. She just nodded and said, "Damn. You really went through it, huh?" That was it. No sage. No sermon. Just presence. And you know what? That's when I realized something I should have known long ago. Healing doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to come wrapped in crystals or couched in jargon. Sometimes, it's quiet. Sometimes, it's just someone sitting beside you, sipping their drink, not trying to pull meaning from the wreckage, just helping you survive it. The house I rent still squeaks. I still have a box of court papers I can't quite bring myself to throw out. And yeah, sometimes I still catch myself reaching for the other side of the bed in the middle of the night. But the air feels lighter now. Cleaner. Real. And for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I'm holding my breath. It happened on a Sunday morning. Crisp air, sun just breaking through the blinds, the kind of quiet where the world feels like it's holding its breath. I was sipping black coffee in the little kitchen that now felt more like mine than it ever had, still cluttered, still imperfect, but mine, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something in me. I don't know, maybe it was curiosity, maybe just the final tug of a chapter not quite closed. I picked up. It was Emily. Her voice was softer than I remembered. Calmer. Less performative. She said she wasn't calling to fight. Said she didn't want money, or an apology, or anything like that. She just wanted to say she was sorry. Now, I wasn't expecting that. Not from her. Not after the court battle, the crystals, the lawsuit for spiritual neglect. But there it was, plain as day, a quiet, broken sort of sorry that sounded more like the woman I married than the one I divorced. She told me she'd left Shaylen's circle. Said it got too heavy. Too controlling. That he started calling himself a soul architect and expected his followers to surrender their autonomy in the name of purity. She said she started to feel the same way she did after the miscarriage, like she was vanishing into something she didn't choose. I didn't say much. Just listened. Then she told me about a new job. A small bookstore in Vermont. Something simple, grounded. No titles, no sessions. Just books, and quiet, and rebuilding. She said, "I think I was just trying to be saved by someone. I didn't realize how much that cost you." There was a pause. A deep one. And then she said something I'll carry with me for a long, long time. "You didn't fail me. I just wasn't ready to face the parts of myself that weren't magical." We hung up not with anger, or even regret, but something that felt a little like grace. No promises. No hopes of reconnection. Just peace. A week later, I found the stone she left me, the one in the box after court, still sitting in the drawer by my nightstand. I took it outside, stood barefoot in the grass, and tossed it as far as I could. Watched it disappear into the woods behind the house. Not out of bitterness. Not to erase anything. But because I didn't need it anymore. I'd carried the weight of someone else's healing for too long. Worn it like a duty. Let it define whether I was loving enough, present enough, evolved enough. But the truth is, love shouldn't be a test. And healing isn't something you demand from others. It's something you do for yourself, in the quiet, with both feet on the ground, one breath at a time. Maggie and I still meet for coffee. We're not rushing anything. No titles. No pressure. Just two people who know what it's like to come back from something that almost broke them. We laugh. A lot. It's different this time. Lighter. I don't know where this path leads. I don't need to. For once, I'm not chasing meaning in every shadow. I'm not waiting for the next explosion. I'm just living. And that, I think, is the real healing. Not forgetting the hurt. But living so fully that it finally has somewhere to rest. So yeah, I walked away. Not with vengeance. Not with some moral trophy. But with my head high, my future open, and my spirit intact. And let me tell you something. That's better than any retreat.